Deb Shore, Lancaster County Board, District 3, Southern Lincoln and Lancaster County.
Krista Yoakum, Lancaster County Commission District 2, and that's Northwest Lincoln and Lancaster County.
James Michael Bowers, Chair of the Lincoln City Council, the Northeast Lincoln District.
Roma Amundsen, Lancaster County Commissioner, representing District 4, Southeast Lincoln and Lancaster County.
Tammy Ward, City Council, District Number 4, representing Northwest Lincoln and Downtown Lincoln, Vice Chair of the City Council and Vice Chair of the City County Commons.
Good morning, Sandra Washington, City Council Member at Large.
Okay, thank you. The very first order of business is the approval of the common meeting minutes for August 17th, 2021. It's been a while since we've had a meeting. Okay.
I will move approval.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the minutes of the common meeting. Are there any corrections? Please call the roll. Oh, we do have to call the roll.
Right.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Yep.
So,
Either
Which
one.
one's going to do it?
can take turns.
Councilwoman, yeah,
Yes.
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 Okay, motion passes, the approval of the minutes. Okay, the second item of business is the Airport Authority update. And Nick Cusick and Dave Herring, if you would come forward, please. And I really want to mention that we really thank you for taking the time to come here to discuss this. This is a very important topic.
Thank you all. I'm going to make just a few brief comments initially, and then Dave's going to pretty much handle the program. Again, I'm Nick Cusick. I'm one of 5 elected board members at the Lincoln Airport Authority Board. Dave is our executive director, so we appreciate the opportunity not only to be here to kind of provide you an update, but certainly appreciate all the opportunities I've had to visit with each and every one of you at some point over the last few months that ultimately led to the commitment on the part of both the county and the city to put some of the ARPA money into something that at least those of us who are elected to the Airport Authority, and certainly the staff, believe is a huge economic driver for the city of Lincoln, as well as a quality of life issue. So certainly appreciate that. No, we do not have a uniform at the so this is not the LAA Airport Authority, whatever. I think we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. I would say that both Councilman Ward and Commissioner Shore did have an opportunity to get a little bit more of an in-depth briefing at the chamber offices here a couple, 3-4 weeks ago. This will be a little bit abbreviated because there's certainly things, as you might imagine, when you're in the process of negotiating things with airlines, et cetera, that you don't, are not yet suitable for prime time, if you will. So, but I think you'll get the gist of where we're kind of headed, where we think we are strategically currently, what our obstacles are, and where do we go from here. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dave for comments, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A afterwards.
Yeah. Well, good morning. Dave Herring, I'm Executive Director of the Authority. I do have a PowerPoint presentation. I have it up on my screen. Is it up everywhere else, or do I need to do anything else?
One.
Oh,
Right
there we go.
on.
Good.
Good deal.
Benny's magic.
All right.
Technology is a
So,
great thing, isn't it?
I went through this last night, as I was indicating to Sage earlier. I was a little maybe ambitious on the amount of stuff I included in it, so I might revert to my East Coast talking voice. So if I do, I'll try to make it as clear as I possibly can. So just to start off, I want to talk about, from an air service perspective, we've always had a game plan. This is one of the things that was asked me right after I got here in 2014. What is the plan for the airport with respect to air service? And it's really pretty simple. As a small airport, we wanted to protect what we had. It's vital that we maintain the services that we have, that we don't lose any, that we try to keep them in place and enhance them if at all possible. And you can enhance them either through your existing carrier adding markets or recruiting new markets. Number 2 was to try to add leisure service. It was always a component of our development plan, and that's because when you look around the United States, even pre-pandemic, airports that were succeeding at growth had a leisure component. And then the 3rd was to evaluate the possibility of ultra low-cost carriers, things like Spirit and Ryanair, and I don't think that one's over here yet, but and see if that would work here. You don't want to bring those in too early because they can artificially drive down fares and make the other carriers unsuccessful. So how are we doing? Well, simply put, everything's been cut in half. If you look back to what we had in 2019 versus what we have now, our carriers have been halved, our markets have been halved, number of flights halved, and consequentially passengers halved. Not only that, but because aviation is a very exponential industry, grows exponentially and reduces exponentially, we're actually proportionally filling less of the less seats that we now have in the market. And I promise you that while this first part of this is doom and gloom, there are opportunities at the end of this, so don't get too upset as we go through, at least initially. The one thing I did include a graph there. One of the things I wanted to point out is that prior to the pandemic, the airport was actually on a growth trend after multiple years, after actually a decade of losses. And so we were on the right trajectory, then COVID hit, and everything kind of got cut in half. So why is air service growth in Lincoln such a challenge? Well, you don't need me up here to tell you that one of the biggest reasons is the fact that we've got an airport just up the road in Omaha that takes the bulk of our traffic. Roughly 20% of our market stays in Lincoln. The other 80% goes to Omaha. Put another way, that means that 5 people this morning woke up in Lincoln, decided they were going to fly. 4 of them got in their car and drove to Omaha. 1 of them stayed here. So even recapturing some of that market can pay dividends for us. When we are talking about our market size, there's a map up on this presentation. We're not just talking about Lincoln proper. Our true market is about 340,000 people. Reaches up to around North Bend, as far west as basically halfway between here and York, east just west of Ashland, then south down into the Superior and Fairbury areas. And so that kind of gives you an idea of where we pull our traffic from. This map, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. You can look at this later, but this shows other markets in the United States and our region our size. A healthy air service system should ideally have 1-to-1. If we have 340,000 people in our market, we should have about 340,000 enplanements, people getting on a plane every year. We are at about 0.46 to 1. And so our goal is to try to get more towards what you see on those yellow dots, places like Green Bay and I think Peoria and places like that. Those are 1-to-1. Green would be great. Those are ones that are 2, 3 even to 1, and so that's something to strive for. But if we were to produce and aggregate, these all average about 1.29 to 1. If Lincoln did that, we would see our enplanements go from about 150,000 pre-pandemic to 440,000. And so even if we recapture a portion of that, it would be significant for us. These next two, just as far as what's happening with respect to COVID, the next 2 slides basically tell the story. This is a measure of capacity, throughput capacity in the United States aviation industry as it relates to 2019. So as of right now, we are only at about 72% from a capacity perspective of where we were in 2019. That basically is telling a pretty concise story that we just don't even have the amount of seats, amount of aircraft operators. Air service providers have downsized, and so there just isn't as much opportunity to grow. Even more telling is this one. While this looks like this whole big squiggly line thing, if you look at it, what this is this is a measure of people actually looking for flights online. This is through Kayak, which is the largest search engine in the world. And what this shows is that it's 30% domestic, 45% down international. That is a reduction of people actually looking for flights. There have been spikes around Christmas, spikes around Thanksgiving, but they're just flat out not as many people looking for flights right now. So it's very hard for us as a small community to grow, and we have less capacity, we have less people looking, and we've got an airport like Omaha just up the road. So what do we look at, and what does that mean for us? Well, let's go back to that game plan for a second. We have literally run out of wells when it comes to our traditional markets. Now, Lincoln has always been a business market. I'm going to talk about what that means in a second, but we have literally run out of wells. We have a partner in United. We continue to have dialogue with them, and we believe that hopefully that will yield something positive in the near future. We've been very open about our conversations with American. Those have largely stopped. If you watch the news at all about American, you see that they are cutting back immensely. Delta, everybody knows the story on that, and while I don't believe that Delta is an absolute permanent withdrawal from Lincoln, I do believe that it is a near-term permanent withdrawal. I think we're probably at least 3 to 5 years before we can go talk to them again. And the only other big flag carrier is Southwest, and we flat out just don't fit their business model. We're just not big enough for that. So cross-recruit additioning carrier off the list, that's not an option. We'll continue to work with existing carrier, and we follow the plan. So the next plan is to evaluate, well, what kind of services exist for us to grow leisure markets? And why is this positive? Is because if you look in the United States today and you see what communities are growing post-pandemic, airport-wise and community-wise, they are the communities that have direct ties to leisure, because that is where everybody wants to go. While business travel has not yet returned to the full capacity that it was pre-pandemic, everybody wants to get out of town because they're sick of being cooped up in their homes, being around the people they know. They want to be able to get to see, grandparents and family that they haven't seen for years. So it is all leisure flying that's going on right now. So one of the things you're going to hear over, whether it's today or as we talk about this in the years to come, is the difference between business and leisure. That is not a measure of the traveler that's on the plane. That is a measure of the type of market that it exists, and there are certain characteristics in those markets. Lincoln has always been largely a business market. That means that we connect to major hubs because it allows for max connectivity. We ideally want to go 1 to 2 times a day because we want to meet all of the different banks that are either going to the East Coast or West Coast. The type of aircraft that we're using has to be consistently filled to 80%. Our community can't sustain on a daily basis filling a 737 size aircraft going to Chicago, so you're going to see aircraft that are the sizes of regional jets and things like that.
Cracker boxes, maybe at times.
Yeah, they're getting to be nicer cracker boxes, though. I mean,
No, they're
having
good
multi-class
planes at
service
6'2".
If you're short like me, it's not
Tall
quite so
people
good.
don't like it, yeah.
Tall people, dang them.
It's typically going to be a mainline carrier, Uniteds and your Deltas. And if you look at the type of passenger that's on that plane, they're largely local. So from within that 340,000 person area, they're basically individual, maybe sometimes flying with a spouse, maybe occasionally a family, but largely flying alone. They have a much higher fare tolerance. They're willing to pay more than to travel to the next closest option. And they are primarily business, though not exclusively. There are many people that utilize our services for leisure components. But the thing I want to point again to is that where this is going is connectivity. It's connecting to the hubs because most of those travelers on a business market aren't stopping there. Now, on a leisure market, everything's kind of flips. The markets that we're going to are much more origination and destination. You're hopping on a plane in Lincoln or wherever you're catching that leisure flight, and you are stopping at the next place. So think Orlando and Phoenix and Vegas and places like that. You're not going there to go somewhere else. You're going there to go there. Because of that, the frequency is less. We're looking at flying that a couple times a week. Think Wednesday, Saturday, Thursday, Sunday, because we want to be able to put bigger aircraft in that, and we want to be able to fill those to 80%. So because it's not daily, we can sustain that as a community our size. The aircraft are sized to maximize the utilization, and then you're going to see carriers that are not as well known because we're not as worried about connectivity when we get to those markets. We're just worried about getting people there for reasonable fares. Then, consequentially, the passenger mix changes. Now we've got much more regional pull. We're pulling well beyond the 340,000 because you might be offering really low fares. People are flying as families or as couples because they're getting away on vacation. They're very fare conscious now. Now they're not willing to pay that $100, $200 overfare. They need it to be reasonable and might even say cheap. And most of them are traveling for leisure, though again, not always. You will have business travelers that are sometimes on that. So when we envision what we want to do when it comes to Lincoln Air Service, kind of this concept of an airline in a box comes up. And what we ideally envision is something that is consistent presence in Lincoln. So not just one flight a day. One flight a day makes passengers, or excuse me, one flight a week makes passengers nervous. It's like, well, why am I going to go there? It's just they're offering one flight a week. We want to see something that has a consistent presence. Think 3 to 4 days a week at a minimum. We want to be able to have local insight into the markets. We have a ton of data. We know where people in Nebraska and Omaha and Lincoln are flying. We want to be able to work with any carrier that we bring in to be able to create markets that work for all of us. The fares have to be reasonable, and I would cross on the border of saying low. In order to keep people off the roads and not driving to Omaha, we need to have low fares that keeps them here. I'm going to talk about this in detail here in a second, but we really want to focus on the economic benefits to the community. And the reason for that is that this has the potential to bring people into our community that we wouldn't otherwise see on just a true business market sort of service. We want the carrier to be successful. We want them to stay here a long time, not just come in, take any incentive that we may have, and then head out the door. We want them to be here for years to come, so create a partnership. And then, like I said, it has to be on larger aircraft. I'm going to skip, you can look at this on your own. This is just an indication of the sort of data that we have access to. You get an idea of the retention rates and the markets that Lincoln is looking at. When you look down here, you can kind of see the main areas that people are going. This is a measure of daily passengers, so you're aware. So this is in Nebraska, in Omaha, and then what Lincoln is retaining. We're able to share this with the carrier and say, look, if you look at this, we think that markets like your Orlandos and your Phoenixes and your Vegas and all that would work, and here's why.
Can you, sorry, Dave, would you mind saying what the first 5 are they like in like high numbers down?
You mean you mean as far as the markets go?
Right there. Yeah.
So one of the things that you will note is that you'll see the highest numbers are places like Denver, Chicago, Minneapolis. Well, that should make sense because those are our markets. One of the hardest things to people, because I looked at this and talked with our air carrier consultant at length, Something to keep in mind is that the number to really look at when we're looking at leisure markets is where's Omaha going? And the reason is you're not going to see that number necessarily out of Lincoln, because if the service doesn't exist, people aren't flying it out of here. So we have to try to derive how many of the passengers that are flying out of Omaha started their day in Lincoln. Now there's some that stand out. One of the ones that stands out to me is DC. Is that we have 18 passengers a day that are going to DC out of Lincoln. And so that might be a market that's evaluated. But it's important, more than anything on this, it's important to look at both regionally and in Omaha specifically where they're going to. So these are always hard when you have a 20% retention rate. Is that it's just hard getting a handle on exactly what the true market is out of Lincoln when 80% of your market is going somewhere else. That make sense?
Yep, thank you.
This is another thing to focus on. This graph actually looks at when you're looking at leisure service, unlike when you're looking at business service, which is year-round. Leisure service, to be successful, needs to go where people want to go when people want to go there. So if you look at this graph and you look at the first part of that and you see the peaks in the beginning, those two peaks represent Arizona and Florida. And that's because when it's January, February, March and cold here, people from this region want to go to Florida. You also notice that those invert as you get in. Everybody wants to go to Phoenix when it's 120. We want to try to structure a system that actually flies where people want to go when they want to go there. So what you're seeing is that in the hot summer months, people are wanting to go to the coasts, wanting to go to California, Washington, maybe New York, maybe going the other way. And then in the summer, of course, or in the winter, of course, they want to go to Florida and Arizona. And then the ones that are falling kind of in the middle there, when you're looking at Georgia, which is probably Atlanta, and you're looking at Illinois, which is probably Chicago, and Texas, those ones that fall right in the middle have a consistent demand year-round. It probably means that we could justify that service year-round, but right now we would want to look at where we can fit that into the schedule because it is something that has obvious demand. So what we would look at as far as potential structures go is, like I said, probably 2 days a week per market, so Wednesday, Saturday, Thursday, Sunday, that sort of thing. You'd have 3 different seasons, probably going Memorial Day to Labor Day to Christmas, and then Christmas back to Memorial Day, and absolutely designed with that low fare, high volume concept. So this is an example of where this could, I wanted to look at a whole bunch of different communities and try to find one that had at least close to the demographics of Lincoln. This is a little bit of a bigger community. It's Allentown, Pennsylvania. It's about 2.25 times the size of Lincoln. But the key here is it is not only a 90-minute drive to one airport, it's a 90-minute drive to 2 airports that are significant because it's about a 90-minute drive to both Philadelphia and Newark. And despite that, they still have service from all 3 main lines, 5 different markets, and leisure service, and they're planning about 460,000 people annually before the pandemic. Now, if you do the math on that, that still ends up being 0.55 to 1 or so of their market area. But this is surviving. This is sustaining in that area and has continued to do so. And a lot of the reason they've been able to push through the pandemic has been because they have such a significant leisure component. One of the things that has been a routine theme with me when I started bringing this up a couple years ago is why on earth do we want to invest in something that takes people out of town? That has been the statement that has been routinely said to me. And I would tell you that, well, any air service actually does that. And so it isn't just unique to leisure markets. But the difference for me is what leisure markets not have the ability where they're going, but what they're bringing in. So what we know from looking at leisure markets is that 50% of the market, 50% of the people on that airplane at any given time are coming from that local area, 340,000 people. 10% of the people that are on that plane are actually coming in from the out cities. So if you're talking about service to Orlando, Vegas, Phoenix, they started their day there and they flew into Lincoln, whether it's to catch a game, meet with family, use it as a base for going somewhere else in the area, but they started their day in those out cities. And then 40% come from outside of that 340,000 person sort of bubble that we're in, that market area. And why is that consistent? Or why is that significant? Because that's where you start driving your economic development in the community. If you look at one flight as an example, we also know from a study that was done by Nebraska in 2019 of an economic impact study that spenders on average, our visitors to our city, spend roughly about $576. So let's take one example of one flight. We want to fill our flights to about 80%, so that means it's about 144 passengers. We know that 50% of those passengers aren't from Lincoln, that they're coming in from either the out cities or from the region. That means that one flight has the potential to create an economic impact of over $41,000. So you multiply that out over the year, the structure that we're looking at, you could be looking at $8 to $13 million in economic impact just by adding leisure service alone. Now, those are obviously fuzzy numbers. There's some assumptions in there. That's assuming people utilize the service, that we're able to fill it 80% full. But all of these are things that we know as far as spending goes, and why we believe that creating a leisure structure, not only, in the past, the system that we have had that has been business markets, has been really very specific to unique users in Lincoln. Because it's a higher priced product, it does not necessarily apply to everybody. Not everybody can afford to spend $100, $200 premium over going to Omaha, and in some cases going to Kansas City. We know that people are driving to Kansas City. Adding a leisure component to that gives something for everybody. A lower cost product means you also trade off some degree of frequency because you now have to plan your trip. But the other thing that's great about it is that we have the ability, if this comes in and it's successful, to leverage this in going back to our mainline partners, because this concept of rising tides lift all boats. We also know, in looking at numerous cities that leisure service has gone into, that in the cities where it goes into, the markets that the leisure services are increasing obviously increase airport activity. But it also has the side impact of increasing the capacity for the mainline carriers. And the reason for that, if you think about it, makes a lot of sense. If you're going to hop on a flight to, say, Phoenix, and you're meeting family out there, you're going to an event, whatever you're doing, but you have to wait for the flight to come back, or you want to stay longer than the next flight, and it just doesn't work for the times to come back on that leisure service, well, you might hop on United then, go back through Chicago to get back into the community. So it actually has the impact of increasing the other carriers by 10% roughly in almost all the communities that we looked at. So this ends up being a win-win for the carriers. It ends up being a win-win for the community, and certainly for the airport, because it gives us some leverage in going out and being able to tell the story. Because one of the things I've noticed in my time here is that every time that we have added service, the community has responded, and that has been consistent in the entire time I've been here and through history. So I was talking really fast to try to get through it, but I wanted to make sure that I covered all of it. So now I would welcome any questions you may have, and happy to answer them to the best I can.
Before questions, if we have maybe 4 or 5 more minutes, or how would help me think through.
4 more minutes.
Let me just make a couple kind of summary. Dave threw a lot of information at you, but I was elected, I believe, among other things, to do everything we can in our power to provide the best possible air service under the obstacles. Dave mentioned Omaha being an obstacle, being too close. He didn't mention the FAA revenue diversion policy, which means, and you've all heard this, but that we cannot use our own money. Even if we had $100 million sitting in the bank that we generated off of air service and or rental out there, we could not use that. The state constitution prohibits us from using public dollars, and it's more complex than saying for MRGs, but thus we're working on LR 283CA that got out of the Revenue Committee. It's a constitutional amendment to allow airports to do that. So, Dave talked a little bit about the interface between leisure and business. I have a tendency to view it as a hybrid model. Clearly, I have employees who go out of, unfortunately, I have to admit, Omaha to leisure type things on Southwest or otherwise when it's appropriate, when it works right. Sometimes they take their spouses and whatever. So I think our flip, if you will, from a purely business thought process, which certainly the Lincoln Chamber and LIBA and others certainly support, to a more of a hybrid model, I think is something that we've gotten strong support from the folks at the Chamber and otherwise. It's really our best chance, at least in the near term, of getting more service. And all of that to say that the airlines, no matter what they are, whether they're low fare, whether they're the mainline carriers, they all want minimum revenue guarantees. That's the reality. And we have no pot of money to use for that. And ultimately, the decision, on the part of the council and the county commissioners to help fund a minimum revenue guarantee to the tune of $3 million really puts that tool in our toolbox to be able to pursue what Dave is just talking about. Because quite honestly, if not for that, we wouldn't even be able to pursue this approach or this strategy. So.
Okay, well, thank you for that presentation. Are there any questions?
One brief question, I guess. Great presentation, thank you. Very informative. When will we start seeing leisure flights? How soon?
So one of the things that if you've happened to ever catch the podcast I put on, I'm in the process of talking about how you develop air service. And one of the things developing these relationships takes years. No, it's not going to be years. We actually started having some dialogue with leisure carriers several years ago, even though we didn't know exactly where we might find revenue guarantees at the time. You want to start building those relationships in advance. So I'm not I'm not, I don't want to throw an exact time out there, but I would say it would probably be in the near future as opposed to the farther future. So I don't think in the next 12 months is necessarily out of line.
Okay. Deb?
There was another comment made at the briefing that we were at by Jay Wilkinson, and having a strong leisure market is an amenity when they are trying to recruit employees in. A lot of, you know, I guess employees of all ages want to take a weekend trip to Las Vegas or, you know, family to Orlando, and having strong leisure service here is another, I guess, recruitment tool for a high-quality workforce.
Excellent point.
Okay. Any other questions?
This has
Okay.
been really great, thank you.
Yeah, this is great. It's an exciting sort of thing, you know, like when you do have challenges, there's always opportunities that are created.
Agreed,
And so,
absolutely.
Yeah, so,
Thank
thank
you all.
you so very much for
Yep.
taking the time. We really do appreciate that.
Thank you.
You bet. Okay, item number 3 is Gateways for Growth, a welcoming community. And so Mindy Rush, Sarah Hoyle, and Krista Yoakum, you were going to make some introductions. Krista?
Yeah, I'm just going to introduce this concept a little bit before Mindy and Sarah really lead you through the presentation. And you've probably all heard some about this from me, whether because you're a friend or because we served together. I've been talking about it because I've been really excited. This was an opportunity to apply for a technical assistance grant called Gateways for Growth. And it really came about because Lincoln has a history of welcoming immigrants and refugees, and has a longstanding history of our nonprofits really wrapping their arms around them and really being a welcoming community. This is a way to formalize that a little bit more, give it some structure. And I just wanted to, you know, the New Americans Task Force is well over 20 years old. That's the foresight that this community had, was to establish that, I think more than 25 years, if I'm not mistaken. In 2016, Lincoln resettled more refugees per capita than any other community in the United States. And so, again, we have this long history, we have this structure through our resettlement agencies, through the nonprofits that are supportive, through the partnerships with LPS and all of that, that made this a very strong application and a fairly competitive application. It comes from Welcoming America, which is a nonprofit organization that really took changed the way that we look at immigrants and refugees in our communities. It used to be, it was really totally upon that immigrant or refugee to integrate, to figure out how to, you know, live in our society, and rather than taking a proactive approach about how do we really look at welcoming and including newcomers. And then the New American Economy is a bipartisan research organization, and they come in with a lot of the data. Who's living here? What jobs do they fill? What jobs are needed in the community? A lot of that sort of thing. Those two organizations came together with these great Gateways for Growth technical assistance grants. So that's kind of the history behind it, and I'll let Mindy and Sarah talk about what's going on now, because this is really exciting.
Well, thank you for being here. We really do appreciate that.
Thank you so much. Mindy Rush Chipman. I'm with the Lincoln Commission on Human Rights, and I'm really grateful for Commissioner Yoakum pulling me in right away when I started with the city in 2019 to start working on immigrant and refugee welcoming and inclusion work. I'm sure most of you know of the New Americans Task Force. Local government, the business community, and the nonprofit community meet on a regular basis to address issues that affect immigrants and refugees in our community. In 2009, Commissioner Yoakum was also involved in another technical assistance grant through WES, Welcoming Education Services. It was to really focus on connecting our immigrant and refugee community members that have professional experience in education from another country back into their profession here in the U.S. And so we worked on that for a couple years, and that resulted in the Career Ladder Project. I'm sure lots of you have heard about that. The Career Ladder Project has 3 main components. We have case management services that help people work through career pathways to help them with licensing and other barriers to reconnect to their professional career. My City Academy, which I'll talk more about in a second, and that's just like a mini leadership curriculum for immigrants and refugees to connect with local government services and to really grow their social capacity. And then the Connectors program, that's a mini mentorship program for immigrant and refugee refugee professionals connect with Lincolnites who are currently doing that work here in our community. When we were working on the Skilled Immigrant Integration Project or Career Ladders Project, we conducted a survey of immigrants and refugees in our community in 2019, and that data revealed, yes, what we're doing is needed, we're on the right track. There are so many immigrants and refugees working survival jobs here in the community, even though they had professional credentials, but that there were other barriers to integration and inclusion in our community, and that's kind of where this Gateways for Growth work comes into play. But before I get there, I just wanted to plug My City Academy. My team member, Francisca Beltran, is here. She's really leading My City Academy here. So far, we've had 2 cohorts, and you'll be able to read all this information about participants on your screen here. But basically, the program, even though we've been doing it in the middle of the pandemic, mostly virtually, has been wildly successful. We're taking immigrant and refugee community members, and through the work of Francisca and also Nebraska Appleseed, we've been able to educate our community members about our local services and just more about our community in general. And so far, we've had 2 graduates of My City Academy join city or county boards and commissions. Lincoln Commission on Human Rights, in fact, at our meeting this month, will swear in a new commissioner, Haruna Hyder, which we're really excited about. And right before I came downstairs, another participant, and Commissioner Yoakum, you don't know about this, but I'm having a discriminatory eviction training on March 17th. Typically, you would think that just my colleagues and other attorneys would sign up for it. A My City Academy participant signed up for it. Excellent. So through My City Academy, we're able to connect our immigrant and community members in ways that we haven't been able to do before. So it's been wildly successful.
Very cool.
Francisca is currently working on our 3rd cohort. Through the feedback we've gotten from the first 2 cohorts, they are really looking forward to in-person My City Academy and maybe a larger group. So this 3rd cohort, we're going to increase our numbers and really aim to be in person in the fall. Commissioner Yoakum explained Gateways for Growth, but it's been a really great opportunity for city, county, and nonprofit community to really work together to take kind of what we've been doing with the Career Ladder Project and expand it into other sectors in the community and just really work on how we can break some of those barriers to effectuate better inclusion and welcoming for our community members. Here's our timeline. We already talked about some of these things, but looking forward, what we're going to do is after a lot of work internally, but then also with a very large steering committee, we have come up with a draft welcoming and inclusion plan. And in the next couple weeks, we're going to release that plan for community feedback. It's going to live on the One Lincoln page, which is lincoln.ne.gov/OneLincoln. And we're going to push it out to as many community members and groups as possible to get feedback. And then we're planning on releasing the final draft of the plan in March. And something that's really exciting is we've been asked to apply for additional technical assistance and seed money from Gateways for Growth, and Sarah Hoyle is currently working on that. But if we're selected for additional technical assistance, that'll go for another 6 months, and we'll be eligible for $20,000 to use to start implementing the plan. And the ways that we can implement that right away is working on language access, potentially hiring an employee to lead implementation, things of that nature. So that's really exciting. The draft is pretty comprehensive, but we really have 6 focus areas that we've gotten feedback and made recommendations on. And those focus areas are equitable access, civic engagement and community connections, education, economic opportunity, safe and healthy communities, and affordable and quality housing.
And I get to talk to you about the recommendations.
Good.
And I would just add, too, that the recommendations really come from a long, comprehensive list of recommendations, not only from our steering committee, which is encompasses a lot of individuals, but also from community feedback. We had a survey that went out to the community. We really tried to target our cultural centers and different agencies that we have that work with immigrant and refugee populations to really get their input too on what they see is needed in our community as far as services. So with that being said, the first recommendation was around equitable access, and I won't read all of these to you, but just highlighting a couple of them. The idea of a welcoming center came up. And I will add too, when we're going through this, these are not recommendations necessarily for city and county government. These are recommendations for our community. So when we talk about going through and looking at these, it's not something that we have to do, but it's really community work at large. So welcoming center, this is speaking directly to the city and the county, though, is a welcoming community coordinator. What we can do as far as city government, and Mindy spoke to that too with My City Academy, but how else can we really be welcoming and be at the forefront of our immigrants and refugees in our community? MyLink, people are familiar with MyLink, really making sure that that great resource is available for our immigrants and refugees, that they know about it and it's available in their language. Civic Engagement, the next one. Many of you have been to Lincoln Unites, to different things in our community that really highlight the importance of immigrants and refugees, but really keying in and continuing this within the community, making sure that we take time to celebrate and recognize things and differences that we have too. So, civic engagement, making sure that individuals, again, coming to our community know about how to engage in different civic opportunities, building up our Connectors program that Mindy had spoken about. Education, looking at early childhood, partnering with Lincoln Littles, another initiative that we have in our community, making sure that immigrants and refugees know about scholarships that are available to them, making sure that they have assistance in applying for those, training for educators on implicit bias, on different cultures, so that we all are aware of interactions and how those can go positively for both parties. Economic opportunity, creating and supporting locally immigrant and refugee-owned businesses, really working with the Chamber of Commerce and other partners, to establish one-stop shops where immigrants can get information on licensing and different requirements that we have in our community for starting a business, education on workers' rights, workplace safety, and building up career ladder. Safe and healthy communities, again, this speaks to our community at large, but this one really talks a lot too about different city and county relations and services that we provide and how we can make those better for our immigrant and refugee populations. So they spoke to the emergency management system. How can we reach out to immigrant and refugee populations and really making sure that they're getting those emergency messages when they need to, and not only receiving them, but then what to do, what are the next steps? It talked about police officers and sheriff deputies and how we engage them in different and necessary trainings. And not only that, but then how we also build upon those relationships that we have between our immigrant and refugee populations and with our law enforcement. And then also with health and education around health insurance, around different health matters when you visit the ER, when you don't, primary care physicians, and then also mental health resources. And then especially since we know that a lot of our refugees have experienced trauma, and where do they go to seek help for that? So, affordable and quality housing. Partnering to provide information in multiple languages. They talked about the tenant assistance program, again with Mindy, and how beneficial that was. Partnering to increase new homebuyer education.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions on any of those?
What are you doing as far as the new homebuyer education?
So these are all recommendations right now. We do, right now, I mean, there are existing partnerships that we have in place with places like Community Action Program, where they do different classes around renting and home buyers, but really building upon that so that our immigrants and refugees have that same knowledge base that most of us had growing up. So with that then, one of the things that New American Economy did for us was put together a research brief. Now, this is in draft form because we have asked that they revise some things on here. For example, just starting with the title, we want to highlight Lincoln, and then we want to make sure people know it's Lancaster County, Nebraska, not Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. So they are going in and they're changing things on here, but I do have copies available. I'll just go ahead and put these over here if you want to see those, just knowing that this is in draft format. Some of the things on there that they thought was striking, that we thought maybe we already knew, but it helped to maybe point it out, was that the increase in our immigrant and refugee population is pretty much double of that the increase in our Caucasian population, right? So that's exciting, and Krista spoke to that earlier. Commissioner Yoka, spoke to that earlier. But then the other thing that we see is the amount of money, the amount of taxes that immigrant and refugees contribute to our community. But then, unfortunately, they live in more than double the rate of poverty than our regular population. So why is that, and what supports can we put in place to help that? Any questions on anything?
Okay. So how will this be used? In looking at the presentation, it was excellent. There's a lot of education going, to the immigrant and refugee population. I guess, how does the general population become more aware of what's going on here? So I guess I'm education back as to, I hope I'm making sense.
It clearly does need to be a whole community effort, and and the education has to reach across the community.
Right. So how is, this is just facts for community leaders to share when they're talking to groups. Is that, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. This is a draft, but what's the plan to get the information out?
So we're having our public launch in the end of March.
Okay.
And then, yes, come up here, Mindy. You're welcome to join. And then after that, I think we're just planning on, again, what you said, spreading the word, using this information to really provide education, but then also to encourage people to participate in this effort. Because, as we've said before, this really is a community recommendation that we're putting forward for this. So we need everybody's buy-in.
And there are additional things through, like the career ladder, where mentors in the community, things like that could really be a part of all of this.
Speaking at Kiwanis groups and church clubs and all of that. Okay.
Yes, exactly. And so this research brief is going to be an attachment in the Welcoming and Inclusion Plan, but it's also a standalone report that we can all push out and we can all use as a tool. I know, just as a practitioner myself, sometimes it's hard to get Lancaster County and Lincoln specific information that's current, and so this is going to help with that. It's going to hopefully be a tool that we can all have in our tool belt to help us get the education and outreach out there.
Great.
Those were, any other questions? Hudson?
Yeah, no question, but really an immense amount of thanks. This is really interesting work. It's really necessary work. Krista, thank you so much for spearheading getting grants to do this kind of work, and really the best of luck to all of us that we get those additional grants to help implement this, because I don't think very many people outside of those who participate in the New Americans Task Force even knows that task force exists, or that we consistently for decades have had a really high rate of settlement, refugee and immigrant settlement here. And I mean, the numbers continue to speak for themselves. We do an amazing job of welcoming new people in, and I don't know that everyone knows that. So really call on me if you need any assistance, because this is really good work. Thank you.
And thank you so much for the presentation. That was really interesting information. I guess the one thing that I have noticed is, as I've driven around the city, is the increasing number of immigrant-owned businesses. That has been just really a fantastic thing.
And not just the 27th Street corridor, which people think of. It is all over town.
It's all over town, yeah. And, that's one of the things as I drive around with my, I see that, and it's just amazing. So they are definitely economic contributors.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, and I believe that Jbc Arpa Funding is next on the agenda. Sarah, you're just
I'm sorry, you get me again.
Not at all.
So, and I would welcome Michaela Michaela is the ARPA administrator for Lancaster County, and so she has been on the floor, vital in this process and key to it. So, ARPA funding, the county and city decided early on to work together, as you know, with ARPA funding, and the county then allocated $15 million in partnership with the city to provide support and infrastructure to our community-based agencies, our nonprofit agencies, so that they in turn can continue to provide vital supports to our community residents for decades and generations to come. So with that in mind, we issued a RFP out to our community nonprofit agencies, and they responded with over 88 million in requests and 64 applications. The process for this, it had a number of different review steps. The first internal review committee was comprised of funders, local funders from different areas, as well as we had somebody from one of our universities here, and then we had an individual from an Omaha foundation that looked at the applications and made thorough recommendations to the next step in the process, which was our joint budget committee. Our joint budget committee reviewed their recommendations in addition to reading the applications themselves and making their own recommendations, and then they forwarded that on to our county board. And then our county board had input, and the ultimate decision was made as to how these funds were allocated. So we are excited with how it turned out. It was hard decisions because there were a number of agencies that needed funding, a number of great applications. But in the end, I think we really looked at the agencies that really needed the money for infrastructure and really were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And that is kind of where we landed at. So you have the recommendations in front of you. Did you want to add anything?
Of the 64, 30 were chosen, so slightly less than half, but I think that's a good number of funds that are going out to multiple agencies. And Sarah's staff are emailing their letters today, so they are being notified today, and I'm already receiving questions, so that's great.
That you are.
Yep. And so I'm looking forward to this process.
Do we have those figures?
Oh, they're in here. Oh, thank you. Okay. I will get you the figures then, so that you have the ARPA recommendations. I apologize.
They were attached to
There-
our
yeah,
agenda today.
It isn't
so
attached, yeah.
go to
Okay,
county board
perfect.
to-
Alrighty. But you,
It's also attached here.
Oh, okay.
okay.
Roma, may I ask,
Yeah,
Commissioner, when you talk about the recommendations, Sarah, do you mean the recipients? You were
Yes.
going to tell us today.
Yes.
Is that correct? When will they be publicly announced to the media then?
The press release, I believe, is going out tomorrow. We wanted to
Okay.
provide an opportunity for the agencies that received funding and those that didn't
Okay.
to get notified before it went out in the press.
Very good. Okay. Are you at liberty to say, not without naming them because we clearly have it on our link, started with 64, and then can you tell us just incrementally how that numbers went down to, and how many, like at the county board level, how many they reviewed? I'm just curious or do you remember?
Oh my goodness.
I don't think we have exact numbers, but there were some requests that came in that were for like 25,000 or 17,000 that Sarah felt that JBC could meet in a different manner instead of having them have the process of dealing with federal funds and all the reporting that goes along. So some of them were weeded out that way. And then as far as like dwindling down, I think it really stemmed from that group of the local Lincoln and Omaha funder that reviewed and then went to JBC. And I think that a lot of those people were reviewed that first section, and then JBC reviewed all of the applications. And I think they had a pretty good understanding, and they both felt the same about who was represented as recommended, just because of the quality of the application and need.
Sure, makes sense. I just really want to thank personally Sarah, because I knew Sarah, and I'm sorry I didn't know you, or you would have probably had some phone calls from me as well, but I referred a number of nonprofits directly to Sarah's email, and you and I had a couple of conversations because my colleagues and I, and I'm sure the county commissioners as well, were contacted right away when these funds came out because everybody's curious as to the process, as to how, and so thank you, in this case, Sarah, and Michaela, you as well, for shepherding those organizations through the process and responding to them, because it's something I know that was not appropriate for me to do. I would have screwed it up. So thank you very much for your work in this regard. Really, really appreciate it.
And if I could just add on that, can we recognize Jenny Ryan too?
Yes.
Because she did all of the background technical work. And then I want to thank James Michael too for chairing JBC and leading us through several long meetings that were very frank amongst the people in the room, and just handled it very professionally, and I'm very pleased with the outcome.
Well, we have some wonderful JBC members with Commissioner Deb Shore and Councilman Sandra Washington. So we had a really great team with everyone making it happen. So we had a good team to make it happen.
Yeah.
So thank you, Commissioner. Yeah.
Okay, any other comments or questions?
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
you so very much. The process is what we were interested in knowing how it was done. So you've clarified that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, is there any other business that we need to discuss?
No, I will move we adjourn.
I have just one quick thing,
Okay.
and it's not really business, but I want to take the opportunity to introduce the new assistant to the city council.
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Chair, if you don't mind. Jamel Ways, excuse me. See, I always call people, well, just call me anything, I'll answer. Jamel Ways, who started in December.
Well,
If you haven't met her, please stop in and
she always has candy.
I know, chocolate. That was a prerequisite, but we're
That
so
was a
excited.
prerequisite.
Yeah.
Well, this is the first time that Sage has been in a commons
Right.
meeting
Right.
as
Yeah,
well.
that's
So
right.
she's a
Sage
pretty-
Walker is our new administrative assistant. You've been with us, what, for a month? A month, so.
Just
you're
to
really-
She
yeah.
has
Both of you-
candy too.
Does she keep candy as well? All right, good.
Yes, she does keep candy.
Right, we're taken care of. So welcome to you both.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes. Okay, thanks for bringing that up.
Good point.
Okay, we have
A motion to adjourn.
And second.
And a second, and so we have a motion and a second to adjourn. Please call the roll.
Yes.
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 Okay, the next meeting, I think, let's see, this is February, March, April, May.
And Sage, if you want to note,